Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Professor Diane Negra, who's Professor of Film Studies and Screen Culture at UCD. And today we'll chat about popular culture and COVID-19. Hi Diane, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
It's great to have you on. So my first question for you today is, where are you located and what's been keeping you sane over the past few months?
Right. Well, I suppose in the last 6 weeks in particular, I've acquainted myself with every good thing that exists within the 5 kilometer radius. So, that includes, park walks, canal walks, things of that nature. So I think, being made to focus down has certain, small advantages. And I feel like I know my little patch of Dublin much better than I did before.
Okay, and I believe that you ended up in New York during the last couple of months, is that right?
I did. Things went very strangely for me in the early part of the pandemic because I had just gone over to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire to speak at a conference. And the night before I was meant to fly back home to Dublin, Trump made an announcement and, it had to do with the flights between Europe and the US. There were a lot of things that just seemed to sort of just suddenly happen that week. And at the last minute, I didn't get on the plane and I went down to New York for what I thought would be a relatively brief stay. And in that way, 5 days turned into 5 months. I didn't come back until the beginning of August.
Wow. So Diane, that must have been very different for you. But Diane, you're a professor of film studies and screen culture at UCD. So can you please tell us about your role and what makes you so passionate about what you do?
I think at the heart of what I do is a desire to help people build their critical media literacy. And it seems incredibly important to do, especially now. I think that it's a key part of citizenship. I think if we are attentive to the norms and conventions that organize media representations, we're much less susceptible to misinformation and rumor and, spectacle and those kinds of things. So I also think if we know more about the history of media, then we can recognize patterns and again, be more informed and hopefully a lot less credulous about what's coming at us. So for me, that's the heart of the work that we do. And I think it entails approaching lots of different media forms, including emerging ones that some of us barely have a grasp on, right? Everything from silent cinema all the way up to Instagram, viral videos and things of that nature.
Okay, thanks, Diane. So Diane, you have not one, but 2 books due to be published in 2021. Firstly, huge congratulations on this. And secondly, one of those books is entitled Imagining We in the Age of I, Romance and Social Bonding in Contemporary Culture. And I was absolutely fascinated by the cover image. So maybe you could tell our listeners more about this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Briefly, the book is kind of, its starting point is the question of how do we define intimacy now? And perhaps especially how is romance and other forms of social bonding, how are those being technologized, right? How is technology, kind of affecting all of the ways in which people meet and connect with each other and form bonds or don't, as the case may be. And then I think we're really interested as well in how traditional couple culture is on the one hand being fractured, but on the other hand remains very, very persistent. And you might say that one of the social impacts of this pandemic has been for us to sort of double down on certain images of the couple and the family, at a time when we're thinking about the home as both, a refuge and maybe at times a prison, right? But our capacity to imagine ourselves as social beings is very, very linked to both a sense of family and also very much to a sense that it is normative for people to be coupled.
Okay, and I'm sure our audience will have a lot of questions around that. So please do remember, submit your questions via the chat function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. So lastly, Diane, you are really interested in this idea of customer service culture and the idea of pandemic capitalism. So in the last, say, 60 seconds of our chat, maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's very evident to me that what we're seeing in the pandemic is a real acceleration of pre-existing trends toward media concentration and also oligopolization, right? So fewer services being provided by fewer entities in the marketplace. And I'm starting to get very worried about the social effects of technology. By no means am I the only one worrying about this, of course. And I think we know that digital culture has been showing us both its affordances and its insufficiencies, right? People have Zoom fatigue. the whole kind of enthusiasm for quarantinis has kind of died off at this point. So my sense is that we are thinking much more about our connection to technology because we are so hyper reliant on it now. But I think related to that also is that, the pandemic has brought us this heavy prohibition on contact, social contact, right? Limiting your social contacts, this sort of thing. And we are operating in a kind of commercial system in which that elimination of contact may also serve the profit interests of large corporations. And I worry about the ways in which, things like contactless as a buzzword are starting to sort of accelerate and creep along. And I think it's going to be very, very important at the end of this pandemic that we learn to revalue social contact and also to push back against companies that want to essentially profit from the prohibitions on it.
Okay, and I am absolutely certain there are lots of questions. And so now we are going to kick off with some of those questions that are already coming in. So just bear with me bear with me as I read them out. How soon will it be before popular culture tries to process the pandemic in movies, TV shows, etc.? Or might potential audiences already have COVID fatigue?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the first way I'd start to answer it is to notice that the pandemic has been extremely good for television, right? So I think we're looking much more to television maybe than we had been before. When I say it's good for television, interestingly enough, it's up and down the spectrum from high and low, so-called cultural forms, because, staple sitcoms like The Office and Friends have done very well in these past months. But people also have been, binge watching so-called quality television a lot also. My sense is that TV is going to be able to react more quickly to this than cinema for all kinds of reasons to do with the scale of production. And of course, the kind of very apparent fact, which saddens me very much, which is that there is now a new level of uncertainty about the extent to which we will still have cinema going as a social practice to the extent that we have had it. And that is, I find that a stunning, fact. But the truth is, of course, that the Hollywood studios, are really in a bad way at this point, and their 100-year, reign, if we can put it like that, is looks to be in many ways coming to an end. So, I would be the kind of person, and I think many people in Dublin feel this way. We have been a cinephilic city here for a long time. And I do think we'll do better than most when it comes to rebuilding cinema here. But my sense also is that there will be a reduction in many places in how cinema is provided as a collective experience. And I think, again, we hopefully will have a new sense of the value of what it means to gather and experience things, in that kind of shared way. So the short answer to a very, very good and complicated question is I would look for TV in the first instance to be faster at responding. But I also would say that I think the nature of that response is going to be in some cases direct, but in other cases oblique, right? So there may be various ways in which narratives that don't officially connect to the pandemic, but still have a resonance to the kind of social lives that we're living now will start to emerge.
Okay, great. So lots of questions coming in around that. So I'm just trying to summarize them, but here's one for you. And actually it's related to your other book coming out in 2021, which is Shadow of a Doubt. So maybe you'll tell us a little bit more about that, and then I can ask you the questions around that.
Sure. This book is a kind of book I've never written before. It's a single film study. So the whole book is about this one film from 1943. It was done by Alfred Hitchcock when he was still relatively new in the United States. And my argument about the book is that it has been, overlooked in, the massive body of scholarship on the director, and that it's a very stunning piece of work for many reasons. But one that I'll just highlight is that it has feminist potentialities. It's female-centered. It doesn't kill off or stigmatize the young woman who's at the center of the film. And so I think it is a magnificent example of some of the, the rich complexity of Hitchcock's storytelling, but in a way that is, it doesn't have some of the sort of fireworks that most people associate with later Hitchcock films like Psycho and Birds. It's quite subtle. It also, I think, is a very significant piece of, sort of home front culture, because it was made and released during World War II. So I have a lot to say about the film, but I'll try to hold myself in check.
Okay, and actually there's another question very slightly related. So this is about the birds. It says a number of articles have been written in the past 6 months drawing parallels between the pandemic and Hitchcock's The Birds, a film that he said was about complacency. And so maybe what the question is, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really rich comparison. And, certainly one of the things that happened, especially early in the pandemic, is people sought out different films that felt newly resonant in this context, right? Films about near future dystopias, films in which society seems to break down. So I think we are very resourceful when it comes to rating, the sort of history of cinema, the archive of cinema, to sort of, give us a way to, experience vicariously or in a controlled fashion some of the kind of, terrifying effects, frankly, of the pandemic on us. So I think Hitchcock's films are certainly, as good as any we might come across in that regard.
So I'm going to continue that theme of the terrifying effects of the pandemic on us. And basically, here's a question about COVID and intimacy. So will we see COVID's effects on intimacy playing out for some years to come? Or do you think intimacy will return to exactly how it used to be post-vaccination world?
I think inevitably it's going to be altered. I think we are different already 10 months into this than we were at the beginning. I think we're going to be rebuilding certain forms of connectedness, as I was suggesting a moment ago. And I think that's going to have a very distinct impact on how we operate, in our social selves. And I think that, if I'm being optimistic, I would say that there might be a sense of how we can appreciate anew certain things that we always took for granted. I mean, it's a long historical distance between, let's say, the pandemic of the 1918 era and our own era. So, none of us have a living experience of this. It is going to force all kinds of adaptations on us. My sense is that most of those adaptations will be difficult, but some of them may lead us to healthier ways of living. And if that happens, that will be, a small good takeaway out of this very difficult time.
Okay, and actually here's another question around intimacy, but it was, why was the show Normal People so popular? Was it pure escapism during the pandemic?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because, of course, today we learned that Paul Mescal's tweet, "I'm Irish," right, is the biggest, sort of tweet of the country. Yeah. Well, I do think one of the things I would say about the pandemic in the Irish context specifically is that we seem to be seeking in this country for ways to recognize ourselves, our culture, who are we, becomes a slightly more pressing question. And my sense is that this has played out, partly in the massive acclaim for something like Normal People, but also in smaller and less showy ways, in a trend toward, sort of cute young people. I'm thinking about this remarkable viral video by a young boy from Tyrone called Dara O'Neill. This is the little boy who identified himself as a busy man, right? And he's just absolutely adorable, right? But this kind of sense of, looking for ways to find national resonance and looking for, I think part of the pleasure that was taken in this country in Normal People is just what good television it is. And I think that's been happening for a fair couple of years, actually, in Ireland, is that we are seeing the production of very high quality material, whether it's Derry Girls or The Fall, or various kinds of things we might point to, even Dublin Murders, which I know might draw people's disagreement. But I think these kinds of shows are showing us that Ireland is taking up a place in the very active global marketplace for so-called quality TV. And so I would read the success of Normal People partly. There are many ways to read it, but partly in that context.
Okay, very interesting. And here's, I suppose we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to try and finish on this one, but I'll let you talk for about 60 to 90 seconds, whatever you have, whatever you think. But it's, what has intrigued you about the popular culture landscape during COVID-19? That's a big question.
So much. I'll say two things as briefly as I can. One is
you've got about 60 seconds.
Okay, one is this doubling down on domesticity and sentimentalizing and romanticizing what it means to be at home. These have been very good months for TV cooks and things like this, right? I'm thinking about the US cook Ina Garten, for example, or Kirsty Alsop in the UK context. These are the people who are doing well. Etsy, the crafts website, has had a massive, kind of proliferation during this period as well. So on the one hand, I think this is it's very clear that we're seeing a turn toward domesticity that plays out partly through media. But secondly, and I think this is the more complicated part of the story, the standard operating procedures for celebrity culture are shifting. Keeping Up with the Kardashians is just winding down. It's no longer going to be on TV after its 20th season. We know that Kim Kardashian did not do herself any favors with this 40th birthday party. And the pandemic is showing us a kind of remaking of the aspirationalism that I think was driving so much of celebrity culture before the pandemic in all sorts of ways. I don't think we are willing to relate to many celebrities in the same way that we were. And if you think about how influential they are, in the United States, it was when Tom Hanks announced he had COVID that people really started paying attention to this. But I think we're going to see a very distinct new set of relations between audiences and celebrity culture.
And I think that's a good thing going forward. That's great. What a great way to finish. So unfortunately, we are completely out of time, Diane. Sincere apologies to all of those on listening in whose questions I didn't get to. I just wanted to take this opportunity to say a huge, huge thank you to Diane for a wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much, Diane.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for everyone else for joining in. This is our last Zoom for Thought in our 2020 series, and we start up again in 2021. So sign up at zoomforthought.ie, where you can find out our list of upcoming speakers. So thank you so much again, Diane, and thank you, everyone. Have an absolutely great day, and see you all in the new year for Zoom for Thought. Thank you.
Thank you.